Well, 2020 is shaped up to be one of the biggest years in tiny home living, and it looks like IKEA is jumping into the mix as well. If you're deciding on buying an IKEA tiny home or any tiny home, there's going to be some things you need to know. So today we're going to be looking at the tiny home from IKEA, and I'm going to be sharing with you some things you need to know before you decide that if you're going to be investing in a tiny home for your property. Well, I'm not the kind of person that's going to sit there and make you wait to see the IKEA house. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you now. The IKEA house does seem like it's very simple in design. It's just a traditional box. It gives me kind of like a, I don't know, like a fifth wheel look to it. It does seem to be on a chassis. They don't give you a lot of details on the house, but I will put a link in the description to an article about the IKEA home itself. The space, of course, is going to be small, just like any tiny home, but it definitely uses every inch of use for some kind of practical use of the space itself. It doesn't come with the Swedish meatballs, which I'm a little disappointed about because those are delicious. And I know what you guys are really wanting to know is how much is this particular house? According to the article, it says about $47,000, but if you look on this spreadsheet that I'm going to show you right here, it looks to be about $55,000. And I know that seems extremely high, but tiny homes have gone up in price since 2020, even PMRVs. And why is that? Well, because of the popularity. Once things have gone up in demand, of course, they're going to go up in price. Now you're considering buying a IKEA house because you think it's so incredibly cute and it would be perfect for what you need. But there's going to be some issues that come up that you need to know about before you decide to put it down. And the first one is the location of where you're planning on putting your tiny house. If you're planning on putting in your yard, you may have restrictions with your HOA. Now, let's say your subdivision allows for you to have a tiny home. Yay! So now you have a whole new batch of problems that you're going to have to address ahead of time before you even purchase your tiny home, which is how are you going to get the electricity out there? And does your plumbing allow for you to have a second property on there? I know that for myself, I had two houses on one piece of property and we only had one well. It became a big issue when it came to how much size of the septic system would allow. You can check with a plumber on that. It can get kind of pricey, so definitely look at that ahead of time so you can budget for your tiny home. Now you got the plumbing squared away and everything is looking good. Now, what about the electricity? Are you planning on having 2 meters that read the electricity? Are you using this as a dwelling to your actual house, or are you going to have somebody in that dwelling as a renter? If so, you're going to want to have 2 different meters so that way they can pay for their own electricity. Water has always been one of those things that's a little bit harder to do as far as separating it. So if you're planning on renting that out, you may want to include the water, but the electricity you can do. You're just going to have to work with your city and the permitting office, and you're going to want to work with a good electrician that knows how to put those conduit lines under the ground. And a few more things you're going to need to check on is how much is that going to increase your property taxes? And how much is that going to increase your insurance? Are you going to be able to put that tiny home on your insurance policy that you currently have if you are putting it on your own property that was attached to a house? Or are you going to have to need a separate insurance for just that specific house, especially if you're putting in your own electricity and your own plumbing for that particular tiny home? And price that out ahead of time before you buy your tiny house so you know exactly what your budget's going to be. All right, well, you're not going to go ahead and put your new IKEA house on your property. You're going to buy a piece of land. Well, the first thing you're probably going to want to do is jump onto one of those websites that has, you know, the big brand ones like Zillow and Realtor.com that have all the land for sale. Well, there's going to be a little problem with that because not many places allow for small structures. In many counties, they only allow for structures that are more than 600 square feet. So you're going to want to check prior to that. The second thing you want to check is if they allow for what they call a manufactured home, because in most cases, tiny homes are not considered permanent structures. So you're going to have to get some kind of clearance or permit from the permitting office of the county that will allow you to put this structure on there. And I'm sure they're going to require you to make it a permanent structure on the property itself. When it comes to a tiny house, many times people don't realize that they are on wheels. So some tiny homes are considered modular homes, like the Boxabl house that I've shown in the past. This house folds out and it's made to modular specifications. Modular specifications means that it's built to, if or not above, traditional home building standards, and they have that certification. But with a lot of tiny homes, they're built as a PMRV, which means it's like to RV specifications, and they're on a chassis that means that you can pull them. So a lot of places are not going to allow you to set that down and be able to pull the tiny home off the property. It has to be in place. The second thing you're going to want to find out is if it already has utilities on the property. If it does, fantastic. You don't even have to worry about it because it already is plumbed into city utilities as far as water, electricity, and even cable. But if it doesn't, that's going to be a giant expense. So you're going to want to check with a plumber and see how much a well system is going to cost you. You're going to have to check to see with an electrician how much that whole line is going to cost you to get electricity out to that location. And of course, internet, because as we know, many people are working from home these days and they want to have internet available to them. And in many rural areas around the country, there's a cutoff line right down the middle of the road where it says, you know what, we're not going to give you internet service here. And well, let's talk about the taxes and the insurance. Insurance is probably one of the hardest things to get when you're not attaching it to another piece of property. Most likely it's going to be under RV insurance, even though it's a house and it's attached to permanent structure. A basic RV policy looks like this. It will cover collision, comprehensive, liability, uninsured and uninsured motorist, personal property, and medical payment. Each insurance company in every state is going to look at that structure completely differently, and you're going to have a hard time finding insurance for those. And you're going to have to find insurance that will cover the contents, because sometimes they'll cover the structure itself but not what's inside. Buying a tiny house can be really exciting, especially when you look at the price and you think, well, that isn't that expensive. Even though it's like a $55,000 house, all those things, once you add it up, it ends up being over $100,000. So definitely prepare ahead of time. When you add in all these other factors, it definitely can be pretty expensive. And the taxes, man, the taxes, they kill you every time. So now that you know all this, are you still considering buying a tiny home and putting it on your piece of property? Or are you going to buy a piece of property and put your tiny home on there? Let me know in the comments section. Now, I've talked about tiny homes quite a bit on my channel, and one tiny home company that I've mentioned in a few videos is Boxabl. Boxabl is officially starting the production, and they will be in full production by the end of 2021. I spoke to them over the weekend, and they're definitely going to be starting this. And once they do, I will be able to go to the factory and seeing them actually put them together. They said that we can actually even fill one up with a bunch of Orbeez and see how it works, and maybe even set one on fire, which I thought would be really fun because they are fire resistant. If you want to know more about those particular houses, go ahead and click this video right here. My name is Kristina Smallhorn, your real estate whisperer, and I tell you all this because good real estate information matters.